Hello, I'm Amy Shaw and today I'm working with Wex Photo Video in the beautiful Warwickshire countryside, and hopefully I'm going to show you how to photograph cars with some tips and tricks that I've learned along the years. So in my camera bag, the prime camera that I use is my Nikon Z9. This is my latest camera that I've got, and it's my first mirrorless that I've properly used. I did use the Z7 and Z6 for a little bit as well, but this is a whole new world of mirrorless cameras. I absolutely adore it. I actually want to replace my second camera with another one of these because I love it so much. For me, the most important thing is the mirrorless elements. Being able to see my photographs whilst I'm taking them is such a game changer, because suddenly I'm looking at these quick moments, especially if I'm on the side of a racetrack or in the pits or something like that. I can see if I've got that shot, if I've exposed it correctly, that, you know, I've got a much higher hit rate. But also working with videographers, which is what I do a lot with my job as well. It's much easier to photograph when you've got a silent shutter. Suddenly I can shoot a lot more rather than them having to take the shots and the sound guy getting their stuff and then me being able to get it afterwards. You can shoot at the dual, you can shoot next to each other. So working alongside videographers is definitely a help, having a mirrorless camera as well. Second body that I use is the Nikon D6. Now, I've been a Nikon lover since I was 16. You end up using a brand and you absolutely fall in love with them and their lenses, and you understand that they become part of your work as well. So I've worked at the Nikons throughout the years. So this is what I got before I got the Z9. I love that it's my absolute workhorse. The battery life, the frames per second, it's everything that I needed in a camera that was really going to do me justice on a day where I'm shooting, golly, 4,000 shots a day or something like that at an event. Both my cameras do get battered. I am running with these, I am dancing with these, I am squatting down when I'm shooting a car that's going past me. Honestly, they get really destroyed. So don't be scared if your cameras have not got their lens protector covers, or you do get a scuff on them. Mine have really gone through the works. So they are hard things. You can make them work hard. The reason why I use two cameras as well is because I make them work hard. If anything ever happened to one of them, I've always got a second one as a backup. But also, I only shoot prime lenses, so by having two primes on at the same time, I've got something that can shoot wide and I've got something that's a little bit longer, and that saves me from having to change lenses or missing shots because I didn't have the right focal length on at the time. So the lenses that I use are nearly always prime. I've always loved two things about them. First, obviously the beautiful images that they create, but second, the actual limitation that they create. When you're on a fixed focal length, you have to move. If I'm shooting on a Nikon 35 1.4 lens, if I need to get into the action, I physically need to get in that, and that creates an element of storytelling that you wouldn't get if you're shooting from a distance on a 85 or 100mm or something like that. So I have to say that the 35 is my absolute go-to apocalyptic lens. This is the one that I will choose if I couldn't choose anything else. It's beautiful, it's wide, like I see the images with my eyes before I can take them on my full frame camera, and this is the one that I absolutely love. Secondly, I use a Nikon 85 1.4 lens as well. This is for those moments where either I want the viewer to feel like they are an onlooker, whether it's a moment that I'm not meant to be part of, as in something that might be happening over there, and you just think, you know, as a viewer, you're not part of that moment, but that's something beautiful to capture. And it's a different type of storytelling. So this is, especially if I'm on a racing track and I can't physically get closer, this is also the lens that I like to use a lot as well. Finally, I have this beautiful Z 50mm 1.2. This is my newest lens, and for years I just shot with these two lenses. These prime lenses were what I shot 90% of my work on. When I got this last year, that's a game changer. For a start, the 1.2 is beautiful when it comes to portraiture. Because it is the 50mm as well, I felt like I've been spoilt with this 35, because suddenly I was able to get most things that there might be some elements where I thought, oh, it's maybe not quite wide enough or not quite close enough, but it was a really great all-rounder. Because this is a little bit closer in, it's forcing me to change the way that I shoot slightly, and I like that because the limitations make creative thoughts. They make you try harder, move more, and think, how can I shoot this in a different way? And because it's such a beautiful, crisp lens, the images that I get generally something I really, really like. So now it's difficult for me in the mornings to think, do I start with a 35mm or do I start with a 50? There's been a few shoots where I've just shot with the 50 and I've loved it. In terms of accessories, I like to shoot very light and quick. So basically my bag is actually not very full of accessories. This is probably about the only accessory I really use. The polarizing filters I use on every single lens. When you're photographing cars, you get a lot of reflections, mainly from the windscreen or from the boot or something like that. The tops of the cars can get quite a lot of shine on them as well. It basically cuts down the haze and glare that you'll get either in reflections from water or, in my case, from windscreens or paint. It just makes it more of an even light over the whole of your subject. Another really important thing for me that I've used since I got my second body is this is a holdfast moneymaker. It's a dual harness. There we are, you see, dual harness, and it means that I can shoot with both my cameras at the same time. It's super comfortable. The leather is something that ends up moulding around you as well, and I've used one of these for literally 10 years, probably longer actually. Especially when I started as a wedding photographer years ago, they were really, really helpful. When I started shooting cars, I was probably one of the only few that actually used them, and I definitely started a trend. Everyone uses them now. So now you know what's in my bag, I think we should start shooting, so let's go. So the subject today is actually my own 1974 MGB GT, which was a 30th birthday present to me from my husband. I adore this car. I think it's a beautiful shape. For me, I also had the hand sign written text put on it afterwards as well, and I just love the little personalisation bits to cars, and for me, this is it. I love it. I love it so much. So when shooting cars, it's not just about the car, but it's often about the location as well. Trying to find a location for your car that's away from car parks or other cars especially is really quite important. So I tend to look for nice country villages that might have either a pub or a river or something that will have an interesting background as well that will really complement the car, especially if I'm shooting classic cars. Something with a bit more of an English countryside feel will definitely work well. So when I'm looking to shoot cars, I'm trying to pick a location where I can park it in a safe place, but also one that I can photograph it from multiple angles and it's still pretty for a lot of the angles, because then you're gaining time basically. You're not having to move from one location to another. So this location that I've chosen is mainly because of the church. I know you can't see much of it at the moment because of the tree behind it, because I would have liked the car behind to not be there, but anyway, we have to work with it. But around we've got thatched cottages, beautiful brick buildings. It's a really nice location to get some wide, some close shots, and we can also move the car to be able to get some different angles as well. So this is where I'm going to start. So when shooting cars, the first thing I usually do is either a complete side profile shot or a front 3/4. But one tip for a start, always bend down, because you want to get to headlight height with the car. So you want to make sure that the car, you're at its eye line basically. That will give it the most emotion basically for the car. So that's how I'm going to start. So the first thing I've done, as I've said, is got pretty low. And I'm going to twist my circular polarizer so that my reflections on the top of the car are limited. Make sure I've got my exposure. I love to shoot really low f-stop. So at the minute I'm starting at 1.2. Because it's a profile shot, I'm not losing any of that depth really. And for me, for my style, I love that absolute depth of field, that complete drop off. I don't really mind, especially if I'm photographing a front 3/4 of a car. I don't really mind if the back of it is out of focus, because I think that when you're shooting or when you're looking with your eyes, you're not looking at the whole thing in focus. You know, I feel it's a more realistic representation, weirdly. It might not be to some people, but that's what I think and that's what I like. I love this romantic feel that low f-stop will get you. So that's usually how I start. So when I'm shooting a bit of a wider shot, especially if I want to hide things that aren't particularly attractive, I can either use Photoshop and try and get it out afterwards, or I can use what's available to me. For example, this tree will be a lovely foreground, but not only that, it will also block out the car that I don't want in my shot. So I'll use this and I'll probably, I don't know, use half of it as the tree of my image and have all the rest of the subject in the car on the other half of the image. So that's where I'm going to start. So I usually start with wide shots of the car because I know that for my brief, that's usually obviously the most important. So I'll try and do a big loop first, and then I'll start focusing on the details, such as cropping on the wheels, on the steering wheel, any details that the owner or my client might want me to cover. But yeah, so first of all, I'm going to go around, and this is me about to do the rear shot of the car. Because we're in this location that allows me to get all the way around the car, it's easy, I don't have to move the car, I don't have to move me, it's safe, we're off the road, so it's quite a nice location to be able to get around. So this is my rear shot. So one thing I like to do is try and frame my detail shots. So the amount of times I stand in a bush or a tree or something in the intention to frame a little bit more of this detail, just rather than it being a straight out detail shot. I'm just looking for something, anything that I can have as a foreground to make it a little bit more interesting. So I don't want to stand on this person's lawn, but I want to use some of these flowers just as a foreground if I can, which just gives it a little bit of depth, which is nice. So shooting interiors, I quite like to half put the window up. Let me just put this up here. And then let me move my keys. I like to half put the window up and then just use my knee. Just be careful with my camera, just use my knee to get just a little bit of reflection of whatever's going on over there, or reflection of the wing mirror, and you can move it with your knee, just to open it or close it as much as you need, just to get that interior shot. It just gives it, that foreground element of depth, which makes it a little bit more interesting. You do need to do a bit of yoga pose to be able to get it sometimes, but it's worth it, I promise. It's also quite nice using any reflections that you might be able to see. So in this case, I'm using the window as a reflection for my side mirror. But you can use puddles if it's raining, shop windows, things like that. But reflections are also really, really fun to try and play around with. But on a day like today where it's nearly 30 degrees, there's no puddles. So with this window tip, it works well in kind of countryside like we are now, but the reflection is obviously quite green because it's grass. It works really well in cities or when you've got people walking past, because then you get people looking at the car and all these kind of ghostly reflections of people. So that works really nicely if you're in a city environment. So this has been a great location so far, but there's literally one right across the road. So I'm going to get in, drive across there and carry on. Okay, so we've shot outside in daylight. I'm going to take you to my workshop now, and I'm going to show you what it's like to shoot in a bit of darkness and yeah, kind of the settings that I use to shoot this effectively. So one of my favourite places to shoot in the workshop is this corner here. I have to squeeze in, but it gives me a nice wide shot of the workshop. And usually there's a bonnet here, so I can use this as a nice foreground as well. So I just have to be careful of the cobwebs. So one of the things I like to do when I'm in a workshop is photograph layers almost. So this is one foreground of a layer. What I'm going to photograph is either the steering wheel of the car in front of me or even the 150 behind. So it's always about layers. And if you're standing on one point, you can photograph each layer individually and you get 3 shots out of one location. So that's always super helpful when you've got quite a tight workshop like this. When you're shooting in workshops as well, they're often not that well lit. So you'll either have like fluorescent lighting or any form of indoor lighting. And if you've got a workshop door open, you've got this contrast of light. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to balance the white balance quite nicely. I tend to shoot on quite a slow shutter because of the flickering of the fluorescent lighting. So usually kind of 1/200th or less basically. And my white balance is always something I've got to be careful of, and I'll try and make sure that there's not too much of a crossover of light if I can help it. And another thing I do is I do make sure that I'm shooting at a really low aperture for stuff like this, simply because it can be quite dark. It allows me to get as much light into my camera as possible. And my ISO, in comparison to what we've been shooting outside, my ISO goes up from super low to kind of maybe 500 or above, depending on how well lit the workshop is. So when you're shooting in a very busy working environment, there's a lot of stuff around that you might not want in your photographs. So what I do is I end up picking details of bits, something you might want to show of the car, but I'll use things like windscreen pillars, for example, to frame those details, or a stack of tyres to be able to kind of wash out one side of the photograph. So it really forces the viewer's eyes to look at what you want them to see, rather than stuff you wouldn't want them to see, basically. So whenever you're photographing workshops, you've got dogs walking around, you've got people working, and often these are people and things that I also want to photograph. So whenever I'm photographing a person as a subject, I try to not get in their way, because they're often actually working on a car or something like that. So I try to step out of their way and have something wide. So if we look at William here, he's also busy working away. So by giving him an action, I can just sit back and just photograph exactly what he's doing and not having to disturb him, and just document whatever he's doing, basically. Photographing cars is never just about the cars, and it's all about the stories around it as well. And one little story I've seen here, super cute, is it just says Will's box on this box. And so you're just looking out for all of these little stories around the cars as well, whether that's tyres or somebody's little selection of pencils that they've ground right to the end. These are all photographs that I've taken where I thought this is a lovely story in this actual story here. So always look out for these other little things as well. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you've enjoyed seeing my job. It's ridiculous that I call this my job. I think it's the best job in the world, for me at least. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it, and for any budding car photographers out there, I hope it might have inspired you to pick up a camera and go out and photograph these cars. If you have any questions or comments, do put them in the box below, because I'll love to hear your comments or answer any questions that I might not have answered for you already. You can follow me on Instagram. I am at Amy Shaw Photography, and yeah, I'm Amy Shaw with Wex Photo Video, and thank you very much. I'll see you next time.